Hey everyone, welcome to Great Lakes Church. My name is Carson, and I gotta tell you before we get into our weekly message that we're a community of people helping people find and follow Jesus. We're based out of Southeast Wisconsin. We have physical locations in Kenosha and Racine, but if you're listening to this or watching this, you've found our online presence. We share content on our YouTube and our podcast platforms wherever you listen, and we love that you're a part. If you want to know more about what's going on here at Great Lakes Church, you can find out more at greatlakeschurch.com or check out our central hub. But until then, everything you need is going to be in the description, so enjoy the message, and we'll catch you next time.
Hello, everybody. I was hoping for a little bit more energy than that. Wow, it is good to be here speaking today after several weeks off, but we are in a series called Voices, and every week for the last, 8 weeks now, we've heard from different voices. And I hope you found it to be a series that's been inspiring, and a series that's been motivational, and a series that has pointed you to Jesus. So most of us in the early years of our life, we become familiar with children's stories, right? Lullabies, poems, different nursery rhymes. And they just kind of feel good when you hear them, or they're fun to listen to, whether it's Little Miss Muffet, who sat on her tuffet, yeah, or Skip to Maloo, my darling, or Itsy Bitsy Spider that climbed up the water spout. Is that how it goes? Yeah, and then was washed away, right? And all of the rhymes and lullabies, or at least many of them, many of the stories are fairly innocent. But there are others, when you really pay close attention to the words, they're kind of disturbing. Right, like this story of a rockabye baby on the treetop. That alone is scary, right? If you put your baby up on a treetop, it's going to end up on TikTok at some place, at some time, right? And people are going to criticize it. But when the wind blows, the cradle's going to rock. And when the bough breaks, the cradle will fall, and down will come baby, cradle and all. That is a Stephen King lullaby. Right? That's seriously morbid when you think about it. No kid's going to sleep well after hearing that. Or how about Humpty Dumpty, who sat on a wall? Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men could not put Humpty Dumpty back together again. The end. The dude just dies, right? His whole life ends up in different pieces, and it's done. Good night, kids. How about the lady who lived in a shoe, right? She's an old woman, lived in a shoe, had so many children, she did not know what to do. She gave them some broth without any bread, then whipped them all soundly and put them to bed. Wow. That's like Child Protective Service stuff right there. How about anybody remember Rub-a-Dub-Dub? 3 men, yeah, we're not going there. I bring that up, right? Here's the deal. As much as we want every story, every lullaby, every poem, right? Everything we come across to end on a high note and to feel good, the reality is that doesn't always happen. As much as we want for our days to be filled with rainbows and butterflies and cotton candy, you know this, life rarely lives up to our hopes and expectations. Often it falls very short of what we're praying for and hoping for, desiring and dreaming for. And it's possible that that's where you're at today, where you're just kind of stuck in life. Right? Maybe you've spent the last 4 years of your life studying, pursuing an education, getting a degree, and now you've graduated. And you can't find a job that matches your training. And so you find yourself doing something for work that was similar to what you did before you went off to college, and you're making roughly the same amount of money. And you just feel stuck. Or maybe you're a realtor. Right? And historically, you've sold lots and lots of homes, but the market is slowing. And you're still selling, but it feels like all your colleagues are outselling you, and it's just really, really discouraging, and you feel stuck. Or maybe you're in a season of life, and you're in an age where you felt like by now I would have lots of freedom, lots of flexibility in my schedule, but instead people have moved back home, or you're taking care of somebody who's sick, and it's just wearing on you, and you feel stuck. Or maybe you're a parent, and every single time you walk through the doors of your house, you look, and on the wall are pictures, and there's a picture of a 7-year-old girl who had everything in front of her, was always happy, always optimistic, always laughing, but now that same girl is 17, and she's defiant, and she's distant, and you're wondering where the innocence and happiness is gone, and you're just trying to figure out how to heal your family, and you feel stuck. Every single one of us have stories of seasons in life, multiple times, multiple seasons of where we just felt stuck. And when we get stuck, we use words like, for now. For now, I'm living with my parents, right? Or for now, I'm just getting by week to week. I'm making this paycheck last as much as I can. For now, I'm just getting through. I'm trying to make the most of this situation. And the one thing that every one of us, regardless of age, demographic, regardless of background, the one thing every one of us can say we have in common is life never follows our hopes and expectations to the extreme. It always falls short in some way. And all of us have seasons where we find ourselves stuck in between this place of where we used to be and where we want to be. And when we find ourselves in these seasons where we're stuck, often it feels like we're alone, like nobody can relate, right? We go on social media and everybody's living their best life now, and it just feels like I am by myself. But what I can tell you with assurance is you are not alone. Every single human experiences this. And all throughout the scriptures, we come across story after story after story after story, same narrative. People find themselves stuck in a situation. And today I want to look at one of those stories, and it's a story that took place roughly 3,300 years ago, and it centers around an individual by the name of Moses. Now, even if you're not a religious person, right, even if you're like, I'm not a church person, my guess is you've heard of Moses because he's a pretty popular guy. When he was a young man, Moses lived an incredibly privileged life in Egypt. Moses grew up in a palace. He had lots of friends, lots of opportunities. He had lots of connections. But one day, all of that changed. When Moses was 40 years old, he made a destructive life decision. Moses saw an Egyptian mistreating an Israelite slave. This sense of justice came over him, and he took it upon himself to kill this Egyptian. And someone saw it happen. And so rumors began to spread in Egypt that Moses had killed an Egyptian. And he feared retribution, so he knew, I got to get out of this place. And so he leaves Egypt as a fugitive. He flees. And he travels almost 300 miles to an area known as Midian. So he leaves Egypt and he travels to Midian, right? So that's pretty much the same distance from Chicago to Louisville. Long way. Travels to Midian, he meets a young lady, he gets married. He ends up working for his father-in-law, watching sheep for the next 40 years of his life. That's a long time. And one afternoon, Moses is walking through the mountains with this flock of sheep that he's trying to lead. And he had what can only be described as a supernatural encounter with God. And God reveals to Moses in an undeniable, in a very clear way, that he has been chosen by God for a very specific task. Now I'm just going to pause right here because I know that if you're like me, when you hear that Moses has a supernatural encounter or he hears the voice of God in a clear way, it feels like a fairy tale, right? I mean, if we're honest, it just kind of feels like, it just seems so made up because why doesn't anybody have those kind of experiences today? I mean, if it was true, Moses was probably sipping whiskey all day long, right? He was taking psychedelics. At some level, Moses must have been impaired, in a little way. But here's what I can tell you. I do believe God speaks. And I've never had an experience like this. And I get cynical just like you do when you hear like, I heard the voice of God. But God speaks in different ways to us. For me, throughout the years, the way God has most clearly spoken to me is just through ongoing restlessness. It's not like I wake up one day and I'm like, I'm a little restless. No, it's often years of restlessness. And I can't use any other word other than these huge impressions that I feel, followed by doors that are opening or closing. And so prior to starting Great Lakes Church, that's exactly what happened. For years, I felt a restlessness to start a church. I couldn't get out of my mind. I didn't know where. And then eventually I started thinking about the area I grew up in. About a year or two, even before we launched Great Lakes Church, I was at a church in Seattle. I bought the name greatlakechurch.com. I mean, that's how strong this impression was in my heart. And then, sure enough, doors started opening for me to come back home. And, people started saying, hey, Dave, if you come back, I'm on board. Well, let's do this thing. So for me, historically, that's how God speaks. Moses, it was much more dramatic than that. He has this experience in which God speaks to him, and it's very clear that Moses is supposed to go back to Egypt, where he left as a fugitive 40 years earlier, and he is to play a key role in leading the people of Israel, leading them out of Egypt, where they have been slaves for 400 years. Now, what's interesting to me is this is not a job that Moses wanted. Right? This isn't something he signed up for. Hey, God, use me. I'm excited. Let's do this thing. It was an assignment God gave him. Now, just so we're all on the same page, we're understanding the story. If you've ever watched Prince of Egypt, Moses is like 40 years old. Right? When his shirt is off, he looks a little bit chiseled in the different parts of the movie. But here's the deal. Moses is not 40 years at this point. When Moses goes back into Egypt, he's 80 years old. Right? That means he looked more like David Letterman with the long white beard, right? That's what he looked like. And so I want you to get this in your mind. Here's this 80-year-old man being told, go back to the very nation you left as a fugitive, and I want you to play a critical role in leading the people out. And here's how the story unfolds in Exodus chapter 3. Then the Lord told Moses, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. I love this. God says, I am going to rescue. I am going to deliver. I am going to free the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt. And the very next line he says, now Moses, go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. He's like, hey, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to send you instead. You must lead my people of Israel out of Egypt. All right, so God says, listen, I see it. People think I'm turning a blind eye. People think I'm oblivious. I'm not. And I'm going to rescue them. But the way I'm going to rescue them is I'm going to use you, Moses. I want you to go and have the conversations. I want you to approach Pharaoh. I want you to lead them. And then when we read the story, it just kind of feels like Moses goes back. Pharaoh kind of embraces this request to let the people of Israel go, and they're on their journey. It just feels like it sounds like it just happens very, very quickly. In reality, Moses goes back, and it's months and months and months and a series of miracles before finally Pharaoh just has had enough, and he's like, fine, get out of here. And he gives permission for the Israelites to leave. It did not happen quickly, but it did happen. And when it happened, it was a big moment. Because for this group of people and all of their ancestors for 400 years, this has been the only life they've known. They've always been slaves as far back in their history as they can remember. And now they get to leave that behind. But they're also leaving behind a very fertile land. And the reason why is the Nile River is in Egypt. And so it is an area that flourishes with fruit and vegetation. That's what they're leaving behind. As they look ahead to where they're going, they're on their way to a land with fruit and vegetation. Right? It's called Canaan. So what they're leaving behind is fertile. Where they're going to is fertile. Now let's look at this on a map. Let's look at where they are, right? You got Egypt over here. You can see all the green. You look at Canaan, you can see the green. But in the middle is a desert. In the middle is a wasteland. In the middle, it is barren. And I guarantee you that when the people of Israel left Egypt, they were thinking they were going from here to here pretty much overnight because they're human. They're like us. They're not going to think about all the moments in the middle. They're just going to think about where they're going, and they just want to get there as fast as they can. Right? They're picturing a land that is rumored to be flowing with milk and honey, which means prosperity and abundance. But instead, they find themselves stuck in the desert for days. And those days turn into weeks, and those weeks turn into months, and the months turn into years. Nothing is happening quickly. Life isn't meeting their expectations. And we all know that when life falls short of our expectations and our hopes and our dreams, we start to get cynical. We start to become bitter. We start to become jaded. We start to be filled with doubts and with questions. And that's where the Israelites are at, because they're in a desert. And deserts are very tough places to live. Deserts are wasteland. Nothing grows there. People get exhausted. People die in the desert. It is filled with all sorts of challenges. But as we read the story of the Israelites, what we learn is that even though not a whole lot of stuff grows in the desert, it is fertile ground for a few things. And in a few moments, we're going to look at those things. But before we do, I know I just gave you a whole lot of details, so let me just recap what we just talked about. Moses grew up in a very privileged household. At the age of 40, Moses kills an Egyptian. Out of fear, Moses flees to Midian, which is 300 miles away from Egypt. At that point, Moses meets a young lady, falls in love, and marries her. He then works for his father-in-law, watching sheep. At the age of 80, Moses has a supernatural encounter in which God makes it clear he's supposed to go back to Egypt, so he returns to Egypt to lead the Israelites from slavery into freedom. It takes several months and many miracles for the ruler of Egypt to let the Israelites leave. That's the recap, and eventually they leave. Exciting time for Israel. The only problem is they're in the desert. Now, I don't need to tell you this because it's your reality and it's my reality. Life is filled with deserts. Life is filled with seasons that are very difficult, barren, unproductive. There's a book I read several years ago called The Land Between by Jeff Mannion. And he writes about the lessons that you and I can learn in the deserts of life. And one of the things that Jeff writes about is he says the deserts of life are fertile ground for complaints. Like when we're stuck, it's very easy to just whine and complain and feel like victims. And we see this with the Israelites, right? They're in the desert. There's not a whole lot of food sources that could feed a massive amount of people on a daily basis. And so they're scared and they're wondering what and how in the world they're going to eat. And God decides to address the situation by miraculously providing a food substance for the Israelites every single day. And it was something similar to coriander seed. And nobody could actually figure out what it was. And so they called it manna, which is actually a question. It's a Hebrew word meaning, what is it? It's the same question I ask every single time I look at the menu of White Castle. What in the world is going on here, right? And manna is what God used to sustain the Israelites while they're in the desert. It's amazing. It's miraculous. Man, God is the provider. But here's the deal. They never got a break from it. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Same thing over and over and over. So you can imagine just over time, they just started hating manna. And here's what we read. The people of Israel began to complain, oh, for some meat. Oh, for some filet mignon. Oh, for some hamburger. Oh, for some lamb, they exclaimed. We remember the fish we used to eat for free in Egypt because we had the Nile River. And we had all the cucumbers and melons and leeks and onions and garlic we wanted. And they had a Chick-fil-A right there in the middle of it all. But now our appetites are gone. And all we ever see is this manna. Now we read this part of the story. It's very easy for us to become so self-righteous, right? To elevate ourselves and say, oh, my, these people. Oh, can you believe God's providing and they're complaining? What is wrong with them? Do they not remember how God just rescued them from slavery? How quickly they forget. Guys, this wasn't quick. This is roughly a year into their journey. And it's very possible to read a story like this and elevate ourselves above these individuals. But again, these people have been eating the same food for a year. They're just complaining. Of course, they've lost sight of how miraculous the situation they're in is. That's why they're saying we were better off in Egypt. We were better off with our old lives. When life is not going the way we plan, if we don't guard our heart, we start thinking similar things. God, I suppose I'm grateful I'm here. I'm grateful for this home. I'm grateful for this vehicle. But man, it just felt like my life was way easier before. I'm trying to follow you and it doesn't even feel like you're making much of a difference in my life. I'm just kind of sick of all of it. I'm sick of living in my in-laws' basement trying to save money. I'm sick of being asked what line of work I am and fumbling for an answer. I'm sick of waiting for this depression to lift. I'm sick of visiting a mother in a nursing home who repeatedly asks who I am. I'm sick of working on this marriage knowing my spouse doesn't even care. I'm sick of looking for a job. I'm just sick of it all. And I just want you to know, it is okay to be frustrated with God. It's okay to be frustrated with your circumstances. It's part of being human. But we absolutely have to be careful how we manage our frustrations because they can lead us to a very dangerous place in our faith, where we just become convinced God's abandoned us and he's unaware of our situation. And we become bitter and we become resentful. And I've been there before. Because if you've been at Great Lakes Church for a while, you've heard me tell stories. This has not been an easy journey. Our church has met in 17 locations over the past 15 years. When you consider Sunday services and worship nights and special events, 17 different locations. Our Kenosha campus met in a portable facility for 8 years. Every single week we would arrive to Tinseltown Movie Theater. And we'd have to set up everything that we owned to have church services. And then a few hours later, we would have to tear everything down and put it away. We did that Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, more than 400 times. We finally landed in a semi-permanent facility, which is the old Hanson Pool and Spa building in Kenosha. It had limited seating. We actually had a little overflow in the entryway. And we had 2 individual bathrooms inside the building. And so in order to have enough bathrooms for people, we had to rent porta potties. And that's the way we did church for almost a year. Exhausting. Our Racine campus had a similar journey of setting up and tearing down in various environments, more than a couple hundred times before they landed in a permanent facility. It's exhausting, it's tiring. I'm growing jaded, I'm growing resentful, right? I'm looking at some of my friends who've got amazing buildings and I'm like, God, where are you? Why does this journey have to be so difficult? Well, we continue reading and we learn something else about the desert, and that's that it's fertile ground for emotional breakdown. If you're in the desert long enough, if you're experiencing disappointment long enough, eventually it's going to overwhelm you. And so Moses, he had to listen to these complaints day after day after day about the manna, how they wanted something else, how they just needed some sort of fish or meat to consume. They're just tired, and Moses is hearing all these complaints, but thankfully he's a man of God. He's the leader. He's a rock. He's unshakable. I mean, just listen to him as he prays. Here we go. Here is his prayer. And Moses said to the Lord, "Why are you treating me, your servant, so harshly? Have mercy on me. What did I do to deserve the burden of all these people? Did I give birth to them? Did I bring them into the world? I can't carry all these people by myself. The load is far too heavy." I have prayed my own version of this prayer many times. When you're going through a long season in your life where things are not moving forward for you, it sets you up for emotional breakdown. And if you think that's an exaggeration, listen to what Moses says next in his prayer. If this is how you intend to treat me, just go ahead and kill me. Do me a favor and spare me this misery. Moses is having a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. If he lived in the era of Twitter or Threads, he could have just gone to social media and I'm sure he would have been really inspired, right? If he would have lived in the land of era of printing, he could have just opened a book and read inspirational quotes. In fact, here's a great quote he could have read from Pastor Rick Warren. Rick says, "Great leaders inspire. They maintain a hopeful attitude, even in the face of discouraging setbacks, constant criticism, and abundant opposition. People don't follow discouraged leaders. They follow those who persist with hope." In your face, Moses. Be more hopeful. Have a better attitude. Right, here's something Pastor Joel Osteen says about attitude in the middle of difficult times. You have to know who you are. God, I gotta get a smile on my face. God breathed his life into you. You have royalty in your blood. You are excellent in every way. Now put your shoulders back, hold your heads up high, start carrying yourself as royalty. You are not average. You are not ordinary. You are a masterpiece. Come on, Moses, you can do it. And I love what Rick Warren wrote, and I love what Joel Osteen wrote. And it's inspiring, and there's certainly truth to it. And it bothers me at some level because when I read it, I'm like, why can't I ever come up with something so inspirational, right? I'm like, think forever. And I'm like, give God your troubles and he'll pop them like bubbles. Like I can't think the same way, right? I don't have that kind of mind, but here's what we all know. Inspirational quotes, motivational books, they would not have helped Moses much at this point because he's gotten too low. He said, I can't do this anymore. It's too heavy. It's too much of a burden. Have you ever said that to yourself? It's too much, it's too heavy, I can't take it anymore. Here's the thing, I have, and I feel like I'm a pretty resilient guy. I feel like, man, I'm pretty strong, and I've been there. And the reason why is because most of us are prepared for days of disappointment. Maybe even weeks, but most of us are not prepared for months or years of disappointment. And that's where Moses is at, overwhelmed. And what happens next is God helps Moses identify 70 individuals with leadership capacity to come alongside him. And here's what he says to Moses. He says, these 70 individuals, will bear the burden of the people along with you, so you will not have to carry it alone. God has done that over and over and over in my life and in the life of our church. And my guess is, if you look at your life, he's brought people alongside you to carry the burden of your life. In one of the lowest moments of Moses' life and his leadership, God provides. And I want you to know that among all the fertile areas, of all the things that are fertile in the desert, they are fertile ground for God's provision. Now, I don't know what that looks like for you in this season, but God does provide. Maybe he's gonna provide employment or better employment. Maybe he's gonna provide contentment. Maybe he's gonna provide strength to endure this time of depression. Maybe he's gonna provide help through a prescription or the right medication. Maybe God's gonna provide by connecting you with an amazing therapist or by giving you great amount of patience. Maybe God's provision is gonna come in the form of an encouraging email or an unexpected phone call. Maybe it's gonna be in the form of an eerily timed message that fits exactly what you're going through. Someday I feel like I just need to do a message in all the ways I've seen God provide throughout our church's history, just to build our faith. I remember in our first building campaign, we were looking at buying land and building a building for Kenosha campus. Instead, we bought land for Kenosha and then purchased a building for our Racine campus. But it's during this time we're needing to raise literally millions of dollars. And we didn't do this to manipulate. It's never been our style. But what we did is we put together a sheet of paper that says, if you want to see from a practical standpoint how we're going to do this, we're going to need this many people to commit to giving $1,000, this many to $50,000, this many to $75,000, this many to $100,000, $150,000. And we had an amount on there of $250,000. It was just, we need at least one person to give $250,000. I had no less than 5 individuals say to me in the course of the first week when we handed that out, Dave, it's almost offensive. And they said it in different ways, but it was the same tone. It's like, it's almost offensive that you would put, we need someone to give $250,000. We live in Southeast Wisconsin, right? Northern Illinois. These kind of resources, this isn't like you're living in some big, prosperous area. Well, a couple weeks after people had kind of shared their frustration with us even doing that, I went out to breakfast with an individual to McDonald's because I like fine dining. And I get up to leave and the individual said, hey, I know we're in a building campaign right now. And I thought you were gonna ask me for money. I said, no, that wasn't the purpose of this. And he looked at me and he said, here's the deal. Before breakfast today, I talked to my wife and we decided we want to get behind this building campaign and we're going to take the $250,000 gift and that's what we're going to do and I'm going to start it off. And he handed me a $50,000 check. And it felt like this Oprah moment in the middle of McDonald's because I start wiping tears. I said, God provides. God provides, and it's been the story we've seen repeated in different ways throughout our church's history. Now, God's provision doesn't mean it's always a nice, beautiful package. It's always the financial gift that you need. But he provides, and he provided for Moses And as we continue reading the story, we learn something else about the deserts, that they're fertile ground for transformation and growth. So God provides manna for the people of Israel, and he provides individuals to surround Moses to help carry the burden of leadership. But the Israelites, they're complaining. They just want their old life in Egypt back. It's not easy in the desert. And so God says to Moses, he says, tell the Israelites, no, you can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, well, you might just find you get what you need. I mean, that literally is the summary. It's like God quoted the Rolling Stones right to Moses. God says, if they want to eat something else, I'll provide some. I'll give them so much meat that they can't even devour it. This is just going to be vomiting. It's going to make them sick. And Moses is really cynical, and he says, God, look at all these people. How in the world can you feed this many people? And God's response to him is awesome. We read, then the Lord said to Moses, has my arm lost its power? I'm not Aaron Rodgers. I still got strength there, right? Has my arm lost its power? And for some of you today, that's the question you need to hear from God. Has my arm lost its power? Am I unable to heal? Am I unable to restore? Am I unable to fix things? Am I unable to bring peace? Am I unable to provide? Am I unable to give supernatural strength for the season you're in? It's the desert experiences of our life that drive us to a deeper level of dependence and trust in God. All of us, because we're human, when we're in the desert, we want our circumstances to change. But God is way more interested in changing us. And we don't like that. I don't like it. We hate the loss. We hate the waiting. We hate the confusion. But often it's in the deserts of life that we grow and we transform the most. When the Israelites went into the desert, they were not a mature group of people. They'd always been told what time they had to get up, what time they had to go to bed, what they had to do. God knew they needed time and they needed challenges to form and become the group and the people he wanted them to become. Throughout your life, God has constantly been using people and events and circumstances to shape you and to form you, whether you realize it or not. And when it gets overwhelming, I want you to know God's arm has not lost his power. He can still heal, he can still provide, he can still give strength. Over the past 15 years, God has been using people and events and circumstances to form and to shape this church. He's not done with us, and he hasn't lost his power. He has the power to heal and to strengthen and to restore and to renew. There's an ancient song of praise that the Jewish people would sing, and I want to quote one of the lines from that song. How great is our Lord? His power is absolute. His understanding is beyond comprehension. I pray that you will grow to believe that and understand that more and more each day. Let me pray for you. Our Heavenly Father, I pray for the many individuals this week that will hear this message, that have heard this message, who are going through a desert, exhausted, scared, stuck, who started to feel like you have abandoned, you are ignoring, that maybe you are incapable. Thank you that you have not lost your power. Thank you that you are a God who can still heal and strengthen and provide. Meet each of us where we're at. May we experience you in a very real and a very powerful and a fresh way. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks for joining us here at Great Lakes Church. Again, my name is Carson, and I'm so glad that you chose to share some time with us this week. We hope something in this talk was meaningful to you, encouraging to you, and maybe even something worth writing down that you can go share with a friend. If you'd like to get involved, maybe join us at one of our physical locations in Southeast Wisconsin, or just be a part of our many other goings on our social platforms or events in the area. Check out greatlakeschurch.com.